I've been based in Alberta several times in my life, and I can't remember the first time I started hearing about a sovereign Alberta police force or an independent Alberta pension plan or even an independent Alberta. These conversations have been going around for a long, long time. I get that there are many people in Canada, even people in Alberta, who don't take them seriously because they feel that these conversations are, in this case, in today's world, there to generate clicks and cash. But there are others who take it very seriously. Certainly, it impedes a lot of goodwill that ought to exist between Alberta and the rest of the country. Alberta is one of the great gifts of the country. If nothing else, Alberta is a place for jobs, for people from Newfoundland to British Columbia and beyond. So without further ado, let me go to a person who has been based in Alberta for a long time now. You may know him best for all the columns he wrote for Maclean's magazine. He wrote for a number of Alberta newspapers as well. And these days, he's doing great service for the public broadcaster, for CBC in Calgary. Jason Markusoff, welcome back to the Charles Adler Show.
It's been a few gigs for both of us, I think, since we've spoken.
It's been a few gigs. It's been a little while, but we're hanging in there. So look, I don't mean to have a cynical attitude about the Alberta pension plan, which is what you're focused on and probably know more about than just about anybody in Alberta. It's just that as I'm sharing with the audience here, who I think of as my family, my friends, I've been hearing this stuff for so long. When I hear about it, these days in 2023, pardon me for saying this, but it feels like just politics. Let me start with that, Jason Markusoff. Why is this not just politics as usual?
Well, I think because this time you're far from the only cynical person on this. I mean, I was just trying to, for a piece I'm writing, kind of tally all the people who've come out against this. And it's not just usual suspects who tend to oppose whatever the United Conservative government does here. United, labor groups, a few academics, the Alberta NDP. We've had Justin Trudeau come out at this in a way he hasn't come out at almost anything any premier has done publicly. We've had Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre raise the hue and cry about this. Today, on Doug Ford's Ontario Finance Minister, Peter Bethlenfalvy came out against this. The Calgary Chamber of Commerce came out against this. The Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses came out against this. Retirement groups. There's a lot of pan-partisan unity about this being a bad idea. And normally we don't hear a lot of these groups complaining about what Alberta is talking about on equalization or them kind of musing about firewalls or some flirtation with independence or sovereignty. But this they see as a threat because this is the CPP. And a lot of people see CPP as a rock, as this, everybody has their own investment or retirement portfolio. Some people don't. But whatever you have, CPP is the most surefire, solid piece of your investment portfolio, other than the the cash hidden under your mattress. Right. So people see some kind of large scale change to this, and they get anxious.
So when Danielle Smith, the premier, and others in Alberta talk about an independent Alberta pension plan, and they talk about how they ought to have access to more than 50% of all the dollars in the Canada pension plan, for those people who are taking her seriously, whether they're in Alberta or not. Well, let's just take the people who aren't, like Ontario, and one of Ontario's cabinet ministers today contacted the feds and said, you've got to do something about this. So clearly they're frightened that taxpayers in Alberta are basically wanting to, and I'm not saying that the average taxpayer thinks of it this way, but it appears to people in Ontario and elsewhere, in all these provinces outside of Quebec, which has their own pension plan. But in Ontario and elsewhere, there are many people who are looking at this saying, wait a minute, Alberta wants to loot our pension plan. I get that Albertans want to have more money in their pockets when they're pensioners, but are they getting that money from us? Jason Markusoff, is there a surefire answer to the question, is Alberta looting the rest of Canada?
The LifeWorks report, this report by this actuarial pension management group, formerly Morneau Chappelle, yes, that name Morneau might ring a bell for those political junkies out there. They commissioned this group before Danielle Smith's time under Jason Kenney to say, how would it work if we left the pension program? And it's legal. I mean, any province with 3 years notice can leave the pension plan and they'd get some share of the money to be negotiated. Well, this LifeWorks group figured out, based on the old legislation back from the 60s, based on their number crunching and the fact that Alberta has a younger than average population, has higher employment levels than most other provinces, and more people tend to max out their pension contributions than elsewhere, because people tend to make on average more money here. That you take all the investment income that the CPP fund has been making hand over fist on top of that, and you get this remarkable figure that out of the whole pot of the Canada Pension Plan Fund, as of 2027 estimated, Alberta would get more than half of it, or $334 billion of it. A third of $1 trillion. I've never actually spoken about anything in Canada with that large a dollar figure, but that is what this group believes they're entitled with. A lot of people think that's bogus. That's dubious, based on an outdated, not updated legislation based in the 60s. But Danielle Smith is running to the races with that. And she's...
Well, sure. I mean, I can understand if she thinks, or if Albertans think that they can snag 52% of the pension fund, that sounds like a hell of a deal for them. Now, does that mean that every single person outside of Alberta will be getting a smaller pension? Because that's the only important question for most people. It isn't about national unity and all of the political stuff that we talk about every day. It is about money in the pockets of people who turn 65 in Ontario and Manitoba and British Columbia and elsewhere.
There's nothing certain. No certain answer to that question. How would CBC go forward with 8 provinces left, because Quebec, keep in mind, already has its own pension plan, was never part of CPP, with 8 provinces left, but only half the funds it had to deal with. This is the CPP is a very healthy fund. It's likely that they could go ahead and continue to give out the same level of pensions for time to be. I mean, right now it's solid for 75 years based on actuarial projections, or if not longer. I think it's good at least out to 2100 they measure. But it would mean contributions would have to go up. Even Alberta's LifeWorks report itself estimates that they'd have to bump up the pension payments by at least nearly half a percentage point, from 9.9% to 10.36, but that wouldn't leave much room for error. So it may have to go up even higher. So I don't know if it won't necessarily mean that there are going to be people are going to get lower pensions than they do right now out of CPP for the people left, but it probably, and in fact, almost certainly would mean that people would have to pay more into the plan to ensure that they get decent sized pensions later on.
But, one of the reasons that you want a healthy nest egg is because you just never know when you might have a rainy day or a rainy year or a rainy decade. If what's left in the fund is roughly half of what was there, I'm talking about for the rest of Canada, don't Canadians take a risk if there is a rainy decade ahead?
Absolutely. Huge risks. I mean, there are huge risks on all sides of this. Alberta is doing its level best to tout to Albertans of the benefits of going this way, but they're not really talking much about the risks of going this way. And the risks are huge for both sides. The idea of pension pooling is that the more people in the plan, the less vulnerable you are to shocks if, say, there's a recession in one part of the country. Or there's a bad year in the financial market, because we have more purchasing power, more investment power in this big mega fund for all provinces. So those advantages get lost for both Alberta and the remnant side, especially if the remnant side is losing half the pot. Now, let's keep in mind, though, that if Alberta decides to leave by referendum, the pension plan, there's no guarantee that it gets this $334 billion, or more than half of the fund. That's to be negotiated among the feds and the provinces. And I don't know if any of them will agree necessarily with the LifeWorks report. this analysis that Danielle Smith is running to the races with, or they will want to cede that much and weaken the plan so much.
So if I'm voting in a provincial election in Alberta and I'm voting UCP or NDP or whatever, I know that if the plurality of people who get in are the people I voted for, my team, I know that my team will be governing. So that's something that I know. Here's my problem with this pension plan, Jason Markusoff. If you don't tell me in advance how much money there will be in the pot, how the heck do I know what to vote for? And how the heck do I know how to vote? I mean, yeah, just from a self-interested point of view, if I believe that there's $300 million, on the other side of the rainbow, if a majority of people vote for this, and I'm part of the majority, I feel I'm a winner. But if I vote for this and then I find out at the end of the trail, after all these negotiations, no, it's not exactly $330 million. It's more like 30 million. Or maybe 113 million or 130 million. Don't I feel ripped off? And if those are the things I'm thinking about going into the polling booth, is that really a democratic vote?
Sorry, you should be saying billion in this, because this is the number.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
no
it's
problem.
such a big number that I'm having a hard time wrapping my
again, because
head
our
around
brains
it.
our lizard brains aren't used to talking about
Yeah.
$334 billion.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Anything.
Billion.
We don't.
We're
We're in little Canada. Not many things are worth half a trillion or a third of $1 trillion here. So understandable, Charles.
But if let me just reframe for the folks.
No, you're
if I want to vote yes, because I think that at the end of the trail we wind up with $1/3 trillion.
Yeah.
But I do vote yes. The majority of people, my neighbors, vote yes, and it turns out we don't get $1/3 trillion. We get 50% less than that. Won't we feel ripped off? And if those are the thoughts swimming around in our heads, is this really a solid vote?
That's an emerging concern from Albertans. I mean, let's keep in mind, if a referendum was to be held right now, this idea is dead. Albertans in every poll going back quite a few years, and including ones taken since Danielle Smith started her sales pitch last month, say that this is, the people who don't like this outnumber the people who do like this by 2 to 1, generally, sometimes more. To woo Albertans, they are trying to put out these big, lofty numbers, but there is this concern, and we're hearing it in these online or telephone town halls that Alberta is hosting to try to gauge public opinion and sentiment on this. That people are saying, well, can we take this $334 billion figure to the bank? Well, no, it has to be negotiated. Can we take a lot of other aspects of this on how this would work, whether it be portable, what level benefits would be at? No, we'd have to figure that out. Again, you're right. It's people are not sure what they're dealing with. Actually, there was earlier today on Wednesday, Danielle Smith was talking to reporters, and she was finally saying, "Yeah, we're going to try to figure all this out. Maybe have to go to court to get these numbers negotiated or determined. Get rulings on what the Pension Plan Act allows us to withdraw." What portion is ours? They'll have to figure out who runs this plan, whether what kind of investment strategy it has, whether we're just trying to make as much money as we can for the fund, or whether we're trying to invest in Alberta. There are so many questions, so many risks, and so many unknowns about this. And that's causing two things to happen in public opinion. One, people who are cynical are remaining cynical, thinking that Danielle Smith is trying to sell them a hill of beans. And the people who love this are not seeing any of the risks, because there are so many infinite possibilities. It's a current sort of a choose your own adventure of what your pension plan looks like under what Danielle Smith and the Alberta government are offering right now. If we go to a referendum, which still remains an if, in 2025, Danielle Smith is starting to drop some hints that maybe we'll actually know what we're voting for if we wind up voting for something or against something.
You mentioned portability without getting too deeply into the weeds here. I mean, every time I lived in Alberta, and I was based there, I guess, 3 times, my neighbors would generally talk about, when they talked about retirement, the ones who weren't 21 years old, the ones who were in their 50s as opposed to their 20s, but the ones who were middle-aged, when they talked about retirement, they didn't talk about retiring in Alberta. They talked about retiring generally in British Columbia, either in the Okanagan Valley, Kelowna, Vernon, or Vancouver Island. which means if they pay into an Alberta pension plan and they're retired in BC, I hope that they would have access to an Alberta pension plan. But can we even guarantee that on this day in 2023?
Well, as the son, as somebody with parents and in-laws, amazingly, who both uh, lived out of province and retired here recently, let me tell you, um, the there is no guarantee that there will be portability, but it's certainly baked into the Quebec and Canada pension plan sharing models. Both of them have, Quebec has its own pension program, and they have built in since the 60s this fluidity that if you worked and paid your pension in Quebec, you can get your pension no matter where you are in Canada. Even if you move out of country, you still get CPP or QPP. So they'd have to negotiate that. It can be done. It can be calculated. It probably takes a lot of tallying, and there's all going to be all these confused people figuring out what province did you earn all your CPP contributions in the past. If people don't know, but people are confused because this is uncertainty and risk. I mean, people are thinking, well, I'm going to get away, thinking I'm going to get away from this Alberta pension plan idea by moving to another province. Well, guess what? If Alberta goes on its own, you're probably paying into APP without knowing it all these years, and that's the pension plan you're going to get, not CPP if you've been making all your money in Alberta. Likewise, for, like I said, my parents who retired here, they probably still be getting a CPP, not APP, because they didn't pay into that. But those are just assumptions. They have to figure out all this, and that's going to be a costly process. Who's going to pay for that? Again, we're not sure, a whole bunch of question marks, which is why the majority of Canadians, it seems, and of Albertans are skittish about this.
So I get that because of all of the politics around equalization, there are people in Alberta who think that Quebecers have more disposable income than Albertans do. And the reason for that is because their pockets in Quebec and their bank accounts are loaded with Alberta dollars. I know that some of those Albertans might be surprised to find out that Quebecers have significantly less disposable income than Albertans do, because Quebecers actually pay more taxes than Albertans. I guess Quebecers pay more taxes than just about anybody else in the country. I don't have my exact numbers here, but when I lived in Quebec, certainly we knew that we were filling out taxes for the feds, filling out taxes for Quebec. We kept being told by the Quebec government that this was really good for us. But when we moved to Ontario and found out we paid less taxes, or we moved to Alberta and we found out we paid much less in tax, that's when we found out how, yes, we were paying more than anyone in the country in Quebec. So let me go to this Quebec pension plan, because all of these discussions are all about let's have what Quebec is having. When Harry met Sally, I'm having what she's having. So Jason Markusoff, you do more work on this than anyone else. Are Quebec pensioners billionaires right now because they're outside the Canada pension plan and they've got their own sovereign Quebec pension plan? Are they filthy, stinking rich because of this?
Well, maybe some of them on Mount Royal will be, but for the majority, no. Quebec actually pays more. Quebecers pay more. We pay, Canadians pay in other provinces pay 9.9% contribution rate for Canada pension plan. In Quebec, they pay 10.8% because, again, they don't have the same demographics. They have an older, less affluent, less employed demographic population than the rest of Canada does. So they have to pay more to provide similar level benefits, and nothing is guaranteed. They're on charting their own destiny with their own population. Alberta, again, is younger, and it is likely, even if Alberta didn't get this giant pot of money, that we'd be paying something less if Albertans were on their own. But there would be huge volatility depending on what happened with the oil economy, what happened with whether people keep moving here. And all those young people who are paying into the pension plan now and not getting anything back, well, guess what? They all retire. And somebody's going to have to pay them, and that will be the Alberta pension plan. So while, yes, we have a lot of people contributing in this huge disproportionate amount of Albertans contributing to our pot, we're going to have a liability at the end of the year if we're all alone and all those people retire. We have to pay them. And the good times in Alberta, as we know, don't always last. So there are quite a few rolls of the dice being played on all this. Quebec rolled its dice back in the 60s, and when they were quite an affluent and prosperous province, and they thought we would pay less and do better on our own. Well, now they pay more and get the same.
But Jason, what I'm most curious about is the benefit part. Let's stipulate Quebecers, because of their demographics, they're older and fewer of them are employed as a percentage of the entire population, fewer employed as opposed to Alberta, older as opposed to Alberta. Okay, fine, let's stipulate that. But let's talk about the benefit portion, because that's what people are most concerned about when it comes to pensions. What will I be getting when I'm no longer working? Are Quebecers doing really well? Let's compare them to people living in any other province, including Alberta. Are they doing better while retired than other retired people are in other parts of Canada?
No, they get the same.
So if that's the case, isn't it very, very expensive to set up your own pension plan? Like, aren't there, I'm not saying billions, but aren't there a lot of millions spent in doing this? I mean, if at the end of the trail people are getting pretty much the same benefit, what the hell is the point?
Again, the proposition for Alberta is they could choose to, if they have this fantastical idea that they get $334 billion to start their pension, and we're just basically starting this pension plan flush with cash, they could afford to offer higher benefits, as Danielle Smith says, and they could afford to offer lower contributions for people paying into it for the future. They could offer these things theoretically. But the more they spend on that, again, the higher the risks are that eventually they'll get back to where Quebec is or where Canada is right now, and getting the same benefits, just paying for their own pension program.
But Jason, if we speak to pension managers, most pension managers aren't interested in jacking up the benefits for the pensioners. They're interested in getting them up every year, maybe at the level of inflation. They're interested in investing that pot of money, whether it's 100 billion or 300 billion or 500 billion, whatever it is. They're interested in investing that pot of money. And isn't that what Danielle Smith is really interested in as far as the pot of cash is concerned? Isn't she wanting to invest it primarily in oil and gas?
She said things along those lines in the past. She said a bunch of different things on this. She's kind of been speaking about all sorts of different worlds. We can pay less, get more, invest. We can actually there are people out there who talk about this as a big job creator in Alberta. We have all these. I don't know if Albertans love a whole bunch of new bureaucracies, but the idea is that we could have a whole bunch of pension fund managers creating this small, filling an office floor somewhere in Calgary. On this, there are all these different manifestations. Danielle Smith is being careful, and so is her finance minister, Nate Horner, lately, to say we're not sure what we're going to do with the investment pot. There are a few different ways they could go. Danielle Smith will say we could go the way of Quebec, how Quebec manages its own pension fund, and they will use it to sponsor economic development and other investment programs within Quebec, or they can do what CPP does. And CBP just invests money where they think they'll make money. And they do really well. They get double-digit returns. They've been getting double-digit returns on the CPP fund for quite some time, year over year. It's why it's been mushrooming in size. It's why it's one of the healthiest and most revered national pensions in the world. Alberta isn't sure where it's going to go. Again, there's that choose your own adventure where Alberta can go. One assumes that by the time that if Albertans are offered a chance to vote on this decision, yes or no, that they'll have some sense of what they're getting into, what kind of investment strategy they're getting into. But, right now, I wouldn't say Danielle Smith is necessarily talking about investing it in oil and gas.
The more people hear about Danielle Smith making the decisions as to what they will be doing with the money, doesn't that harm the cause, if her cause is getting Albertans to vote for a separate Alberta pension plan? The reason I say that is because in the rest of the country, it doesn't matter what province you're in, and of course, with respect to the federal CPP, nobody believes that Justin Trudeau is micromanaging the pension plan. Nobody believes that if, let's say, Pierre Poilievre gets elected in a couple of years as prime minister, nobody believes that Pierre Poilievre will be micromanaging it. There's a separate board for that, separate professionals who are nonpartisan. They're absolutely independent of the government. And that's why people trust that pension plan. There are many unions in this country. I used to deal a lot with the Ontario Teachers Union, which at one time had the best pension plan in Canada. For all I know, it still does. And one of their rules was that the actual president of the union, vice president, none of those top union executives touched the pension plan. That was absolutely the domain of a person who happened to be a very conservative guy who was the pension manager, and he was the boss. And there was a big wall that was institutionalized. Okay, it was part of their own constitution, a wall separating the person who was in charge of the pensions from all the political people who were in charge of the union. If people in Alberta feel that Danielle Smith or whoever is the premier and her cabinet, her colleagues, if they have some sovereignty over their sacred pension plan, isn't that the kind of thing that hurts Danielle Smith's cause? If I think that the government is going to be micromanaging the pension plan and the politicians are micromanaging it, I want no part of that.
That goes down to the level. One of the things built into this, the opposition to this, is trust in Danielle Smith, trust in the politicians to handle this. There are these concerns right now. Alberta's Teachers Pension Fund and the Heritage Savings Fund and a whole bunch of other pots of Alberta public money are stored by this group called AIMCO, the Alberta Investment Management Company. The politicians have generally kept their hands off of it, but there's nothing to say they can't. Whereas the CPP, here's one thing that's not appreciated about CPP. It's not controlled by Ottawa. It's controlled by a consortium of Ottawa and every province that pays into it. So Alberta's finance minister has some say, if Alberta would have some say in the matter, if Prime Minister Poilievre or Prime Minister Trudeau wanted to suddenly change the direction or investment strategy of the CPP. If Alberta hands their money over to AIMCO, right now that fund is vulnerable to political interference. There's not been any. The Alberta NDP and Rachel Notley flirted with doing some of that before, but right now there's not. Who knows what sort of fund? We don't know who's going to manage the investments, this investment pot in Alberta. There are even some people in Danielle Smith's government and the LifeWorks report that gave them these great ideas, suggested you can actually save money by keeping your whole assets with CPPIB, the investment board that runs CPP, and do things fine. But we don't know. That is unclear. Again, maybe by the referendum, if it comes to that, we'll know. But I would underline that this is really unpopular right now, and Danielle Smith will probably need something to change in popular opinion to actually go to a referendum, because otherwise she'd be calling a referendum that she's almost certain to lose.
Give me a sense of how unpopular this is. I mean, would I be able to compare the unpopularity right now in Alberta of the Alberta pension plan idea? Is this like the difference between how the NDP does and the UCP does in rural Alberta? Because there is this feeling that the NDP doesn't have a shot almost anywhere in rural Alberta. The gap is that large. Is it as large against this particular pension plan? Is that a fair comparison?
You've been reading my old pieces, I see. Good stuff. That's something. I mean, there are not many issues where that are like 60-20. 60% in favor, 20 opposed. But that tends to be roughly the proportion of it. And that is the disproportionate gap between, the NDP and the United Conservatives in a place like Grand Prairie or Fort McMurray. There is widespread opposition to this, a lot of cynicism about this. It seems like there are more people who are not sure what to do on this. These numbers, like $334 billion or thousands of dollars in pension contribution savings or higher benefits. Some people may be intrigued by these, but the overall opinion has not moved despite all these great numbers and this big advertising campaign, some $7 million or $7.5 million that Alberta has devoted to putting this all over the TV waves and on pretty much every news article or games app I use on my phone.
Did you say 60-20 against the plan?
60-20 against the plan. It's 50-20, 55-20, 60-20.
Wow.
It's been around there. I don't have the most recent numbers at my fingertips, but it's it's not quite as unpopular as shutting down pipelines in Alberta, but it's it's a hard sell. It's proving a hard sell, and I don't know if the dial has really changed much. Maybe a few people, like I said, are uncertain now than they were. Maybe a few people are in the undecided, more people in the undecided column, but Danielle Smith and her sales pitch have a whole lot more job to do. And the challenge for them is that we're going to start seeing provinces raise a louder stink about this. The federal government is raising a louder stink about this, and they have Pierre Poilievre on their side. So while Alberta is trying to, paper the province with flyers saying how good this is, a lot of people are at the printing machine printing their own flyers as well.
When you give me that 60-20 number, when you tell me that Albertans are overwhelmingly against, I guess that answers the question that many of us have, which is, why did Pierre Poilievre speak out against the plan? Why did he recommend to his friends, his neighbors, and of course he grew up in Alberta, that they could continue to stay inside the Canada pension plan? I guess that was a no-risker on Poilievre's part.
Well, it's for that reason that it's not, and that's the reason that Trudeau chimed in too. He knows that he's on the right side of public opinion on this one, but also for both of them, they know that this is an idea that would materially weaken other provinces and people in every other province that doesn't start with the letter Q. So if they want to battle for votes in Atlantic Canada and BC, Ontario, and other provinces, they want to campaign against something that is going to make them pay more in contributions and maybe harm their benefits or the sanctity of their sacred retirement nest egg.
Jason Markusoff, I've always read your columns. I read them in Maclean's. I read them in the Journal. I read your CBC columns. And besides, that I think of executive producer of CBC Calgary as the queen of political talk, Kathleen Petty. My relationship with Kathleen Petty, my friendship with Kathleen Petty would be put at risk if I stopped reading Jason Markusoff.
My boss will appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate
Jason, thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for your sense of humor, most important. Thank you for your information and your capacity for the art of a declining discipline, and that's the art of conversation. Thank you for this.
Appreciate it. I have fun.
Jason Markusoff is a person that is a go-to for all things political in Alberta, and he's with CBC Calgary. Jason Markusoff, Markusoff. Thank you very much for joining us on the Charles Adler Show.